Australia solved its water problem by putting whole towns underwater. Under Lake Yucumbene, the main street of Old Adaminaby is now used as a boat ramp. Divers have mapped an entire cattle station on the floor of Lake Argyle. Some of these towns still have their cemeteries down there, and when the drought gets bad enough, a few of them come back. These are 20 Australian towns that are underwater right now. Number 20. Danbulla. Danbulla sat on the Atherton tableland, about 100 kilometers inland from Cairns. Today, the name belongs to a state forest of 12,000 hectares and one of the best fishing lakes in the country. Satellite view shows you blue water ringed by rainforest. What it cannot show you is the farming settlement sitting on the bottom of it. Danbulla grew up around tobacco, and tobacco needs reliable water. In 1953, the Queensland government began building Tinaroo Falls Dam across the Barron River, the first large dam in the state built primarily for irrigation, at a cost of $12.6 million. By 1958, almost every building in Danbulla had been pulled out ahead of the water. Two were left standing on the edge of the new lake, a small schoolhouse, and one family's home. The graves of the district's earliest settlers sit just above the waterline. Lake Tinaroo now holds 438,000 megaliters and runs 42 meters deep at the wall. Access is easy. The 28-kilometer Danbulla Forest Drive loops the shoreline, past brick chimney stacks standing alone in regrowth. Since 1986, the lake has been stocked with barramundi that grow to monstrous size because they cannot breed in fresh water. People fly in from overseas to catch them. They are fishing over somebody's tobacco farm. Number 19. Bonnie Doon. Bonnie Doon is 168 kilometers northeast of Melbourne on the Brankeat arm of Lake Eldon. Most Australians know the name from a film. Almost nobody knows the town they are quoting is not where it used to be. Selectors took up land here in the 1870s, and the settlement was originally called Doon, named by Scottish settler Thomas Nixon after Loch Doon. A school opened in 1871. The Presbyterian Church, built in 1900, was dedicated to the memory of Queen Victoria and is recorded as the first monument in the British Empire dedicated to her after her death. Then Victoria decided to enlarge Lake Eldon for irrigation. From 1953, the town was physically dragged uphill. Mitchell and Evans, the local big store, was cut in half and trucked to the new site in pieces. The churches were high enough to stay. The original town site went under in 1955. The population more than doubled while the dam works ran, then collapsed when they finished. Today, 666 people live here, and the town is best known as the setting for the Kerrigan family holiday house in the castle. Tourists come for the serenity. It is sitting on top of the old main street. Number 18. Welshman's Reef. Welshman's Reef is on the Loddon River in central Victoria, ringed by the goldfields towns of Meldon, Newstead, and Maryborough. On a map, it is a scatter of houses beside a large reservoir. What the map does not tell you is that the reason the place stopped growing is now underwater. This was a gold hamlet. When the alluvial gold thinned out, the miners moved onto the river flats and became farmers. And those flats were the best soil for kilometers. A school opened in 1877. The population peaked at 215 people in 1915, and it was never bigger than that. In 1947, the State Rivers and Water Supply Commission began Cairn Curran, a 44-meter earth wall stretching 1,548 meters across the Loddon, built largely by post-war migrant labor housed in camps at Berringhup. It was finished in 1956, and the river flats disappeared under 148,000 megaliters of irrigation water. The school closed in 1965. Today, there is a caravan park, a sailing club, and a hydro station being decommissioned. In the floods of January 2011, inflows hit roughly 100,000 megaliters a day, and the reservoir held them back long enough to delay flooding downstream by almost a full day. The water that drowned Berringhup's farmland is now what saves Berringhup. Number 17. Darranall. Darranall is 130 kilometers northwest of Melbourne, between Bendigo and Heathcote. It still appears on maps. Most of what made it a place does not. Google will show you the McIver Highway skirting a large V-shaped lake. What it cannot show you is the older road underneath, along with the railway line, the bridges, and the river flats that the community was built around. Lake Epilock was constructed between 1960 and 1964 across the Campaspe and Coliban rivers. It holds 304,651 megaliters, covers 3,011 hectares, and runs about 30 meters deep. It drinks for Bendigo, Heathcote, and Ballarat. The original Bendigo to Heathcote to Melbourne Road went under. So did the rail alignment, which is why the modern O'Keefe Rail Trail now crosses on a causeway and a 90-meter bridge, with a replica station board where Darrenall Station used to be. When levels drop, the lake bed gives things up. Stone fences run out into the mud. Homestead footings appear. So does a circular puddling machine, the stone wheel used by Chinese miners to wash gold-bearing clay in the 1850s. In October 2022, Epilogue filled and spilled hard. The floods that tore up the shoreline briefly reburied a goldfield. Number 16, Darwin. Not the city. Darwin, Tasmania sat in the Upper King River Valley on the west coast, in the shadow of Mount Darwin in some of the roughest country in Australia. Look it up on satellite and you get open water, 54 square kilometers of it. What you cannot see is that the site is under Lake Burbury, and it is not alone down there. This was mining country, tied to the copper rush that made Queenstown and the Mount Lyell Company. Then, in the 1980s, the Hydroelectric Commission began the King River Power Development. Crotty Dam, an 83-meter concrete-faced rockfill wall in the King River Gorge, was completed in 1991. A second wall, Darwin Dam, was built beside Mount Darwin to stop the reservoir spilling into the Andrew River catchment. The valley filled with over 1 million megaliters, and the historic sites of Darwin went under with it. So did long sections of the Kelly Basin Road, and so did the bridge of the North Mount Lyell Railway, which nobody bothered to salvage before the water arrived. It is still standing, down there in the dark, carrying nothing. The lake is now known for trout fishing and for the Lyell Highway crossing it on a causeway. You drive over a drowned railway to get anywhere. Number 15, Wyangala Flats. Wyangala Flats was a scattered pioneering settlement in the Lachlan Valley, about 38 kilometers upstream of Cowra in central New South Wales. It was established in the 1840s. It does not exist. What Google shows you now is Lake Wyangala, a body of water 2.5 times the size of Sydney Harbour. What it cannot show you is the original settlement and its cemetery, both sitting on the lake bed. Construction of Wyangala Dam started in 1928 and finished in 1935 at a cost of £1.35 million. 4 men died building it. The first was Leslie Jeffrey, who fell into the Lachlan River and drowned in 1929. A laborer named Walter Watt died next. A carpenter died in 1933. When the wall was closed, the flats and the graves of the people who settled them went under together. The 1935 dam then failed to hold the floods of 1952, so between 1961 and 1971, it was rebuilt at a cost of £18 million, tripling the storage to 1.22 million megaliters and pushing the water 79 meters deep. The village built to replace what was drowned has 216 people and no historic buildings at all. It was only ever meant to house the men doing the drowning. Number 14. Kenya. Kenya is 32 kilometers north of Monto in Queensland's Burnett Country, about 520 kilometers northwest of Brisbane. The locality has 27 residents. Google shows you a national park of sandstone cliffs and caves and a lake full of bass in Saratoga. What it cannot show you is the goldfield town underneath the lake. Gold was found in Kenya Gorge in 1870, and a township grew along Three Moon Creek. It had a school by 1890, which became a state school in 1909. Mining hung on until the early 1920s, then stopped, and the town was left to fall apart on its own. In 1982, Kenya Dam was completed across Three Moon Creek, and 88,580 megaliters of irrigation water covered the remains. The old cemetery could not be moved, so a selection of headstones was lifted out and mounted at the Kenya Dam Lookout, where you can read them today with the water behind them. When the lake drops far enough, the tops of buildings come back. They were last seen in 2010 before the floods of January 2011 buried them again. There is also a persistent local story that a rich gold seam was found during construction and concreted over to keep the project on schedule. If it is true, it is under the wall. Number 13. Happy Valley. Happy Valley is not remote. It is a suburb of southern Adelaide, roughly 20 kilometers from the city center, with a reservoir at the middle of it that supplies more than 500,000 people. What almost nobody living there realizes is that the original village is under the water they drink. Between 1892 and 1897, 500 men spent 4 years building an earth dam, 2 tunnels, 2 stone towers, and a weir at Clarendon at a cost of $1.8 million. It was South Australia's third reservoir. The township, The school and the cemetery all sat inside the floodline, so all three were moved. The town went 4 kilometers east, the cemetery went west and now sits at the base of the dam wall. The school shifted to 2 acres on Red Hill Road, donated by a local farmer, Harry Mason, and closed for 18 months in the process, which meant some children simply did not go to school until it reopened in September 1898. On 7th August 1896, the governor opened the inlet valve and the valley began to fill. For decades, people swore the church steeple appeared above the water in dry years. It did not. Every building was demolished first, and the fruit trees and vines were sold off. What they were looking at was a pump frame. Number 12, Miena. Miena sits at the southern end of Yingina, the Great Lake, more than 1,000 meters up on Tasmania's Central Highlands. It is a shack village of about 127 people and one of the coldest inhabited places in the state. From the air, it looks like a natural alpine lake, and it partly is. What that surface hides is that the shoreline has been drowned 3 separate times. The Great Lake was first dammed in 1911 by a private company wanting power to treat ores, with the water piped down to Wadamana. The government took the scheme over in 1914, and the Wadamana station was generating by May 1916. Then, between 1919 and 1922, a second wall went up. Miena Dam No. 2, a multiple arch buttress structure, 12 meters high and 360 meters long, and the first dam in Australia built of reinforced concrete. In 1967, a rock-filled dam replaced it and lifted the lake again for the Potina Power Station. The grazing runs and holdings along the old shore, including land held by the Brandom family, went under. So did the 1922 dam. Of the 3 walls at Miena today, 2 are usually underwater. The hydro drowned its own engineering heritage to make more electricity. Number 11, Crotty. Crotty was a mining town in the King River Valley on Tasmania's west coast, named after the man who ran the North Mount Lyell Company. It had a smelter, a hotel, a railway, and a reason to exist. Then the copper operation folded in the 1920s and everybody left. For 60 years it was a ghost town in the bush, slowly collapsing, visited by bushwalkers who came for the ruins. Google shows you Lake Burbury. What it cannot show you is that Crotty is at the bottom of it. When Crotty Dam closed in 1991 and the reservoir filled through 1991 and 1992, the site went under with everything still lying where it fell. Smelter foundations, railway remnants, scattered mining ironwork. At full supply, it lies tens of meters down. In dry years, parts of it break the surface again, concrete slabs and rusted metal on a mud shoreline that people reach by boat. The water above it is stained by more than a century of mining upstream. Crotty spent 70 years dying and then got buried by the same industry that killed it. If you're enjoying the video so far, then make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Number 10, Copetown and Dacey Town. Copetown and Dacey Town sat on Copes Creek about 35 kilometers southwest of Inverell in northern New South Wales. Copetown started life with the name Boggy Camp. It became a mining village and what it mined was diamonds. The Copetown field was Australia's most significant diamond ground for decades. Google shows you Lake Copetown, 3 times the volume of Sydney Harbour, famous for Murray cod over a meter long. What it cannot show you is 2 villages under 104 meters of water. Copetown was already close to abandoned by the time the resumptions began. Private land holdings were taken in 1971, public land in 1972, and the village formally ceased to exist. Families who had been there for generations were bought out, some of them furious. Construction on the 113-meter wall started in 1968, and the dam was opened by Premier Neville Wran in October 1976. The Copetown Cemetery is still down there, and it has been exposed more than once when the storage falls low enough. Camping is easy along the northern shore, and the fishing is genuinely world-class. There is a caravan park, a golf course, and floodlit tennis courts. You can play a round of golf above a diamond field and a graveyard. Number 9, Old Dartmouth. Old Dartmouth was a gold hamlet on the Dart River in the alpine country of northeast Victoria, roughly 75 kilometers southeast of Wodonga. It never amounted to much. The gold was real, but the country was so inaccessible that the cost of hauling anything in or out killed the workings by 1906. One family kept a hotel there until 1916, and went on farming their 50 acres until they finally walked away. 1938. Then the governments of Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, and the Commonwealth agreed to dam the Mida. Dartmouth Dam was built between 1973 and 1979 for $139 million. At 180 meters, it is the highest dam in Australia, and the reservoir behind it holds close to 4 million megaliters, the largest storage in the entire Murray catchment. Old Dartmouth is somewhere underneath it. To build the thing, a new town called Dartmouth was constructed, with a shopping center, a town hall, a primary school, and a sports ground. By 1976, it had nearly 1,600 people. When the dam was finished, the whole town was sold off. Today, about 104 people live there. Australia drowned one dying town and built another one that almost died the same way. Number 8. Old Glenmaggie. Old Glenmaggie stood on the McAllister River in Gippsland, about 12 kilometers north of Hayfield. It was settled in the 1850s by Malcolm McFarlane. Town blocks went on sale in 1877, and at its peak it had 2 hotels, 3 churches, a string of shops, and a mechanics institute built in 1890. The school opened around 1875 and doubled as the post office, with mail arriving daily by bicycle from Hayfield. Its first teacher, Clara Weeks, went on to become a prominent unionist and suffragette. Google shows you a lake full of speedboats and water skiers. What it cannot show you is the town on the bottom. Farmers downstream wanted irrigation for sugar beet, maize, and lucerne, so the State Rivers and Water Supply Commission built a weir at Glenmaggie between 1919 and 1927. Much of the town went under. The Mechanics Institute, the Catholic Church, and the school were hauled uphill. The pub was not. In 1957, the wall was raised again, taking most of the good farmland that was left. In dry spells, the lake gives back old bridges, loose bricks, and fence lines along Glenmaggie Creek. The local economy went from milk and vegetables to caravan parks. Nearly half the houses here are now empty on any given night. Number 7. Darlingford. Darlingford was named after Sir Charles Darling, Governor of Victoria, and it appeared during the gold rush of the 1860s near the junction of the Big and Goulburn rivers. At its peak, it had 7 hotels, stores, a post office, a school, and hundreds of residents making a living from the diggings. Today, Google shows you Lake Eildon, one of Victoria's largest storages at 3.39 million megaliters, with houseboats parked in the arms of it. What it cannot show you is that Darlingford is down there, and that it was drowned twice. The first burial came in the 1920s, when Sugarloaf Dam was built across the Goulburn between Mount Sugarloaf and Mount Pinniger. Then, Victoria enlarged the whole scheme after the war. When the new Eildon Dam was completed in the mid-1950s, Darlingford was gone for good, its buildings either demolished or simply left to go under. During the Millennium Drought, the lake fell to 5.3%, the lowest since the dam was finished, and remnants of the old township briefly reappeared in the mud. Boat ramps were left stranded meters above the water. The lake has since filled completely for the first time in almost 30 years. A gold town with 7 pubs is now a depth reading. Number 6. Old Talbingo. Old Talbingo sat in a valley on the Tumut River, 42 kilometers from Tumut in the Snowy Mountains foothills. It was tiny. A hotel, the station, and its homestead, a service station, and a few holiday cabins. And when the government came for it, only 5 families had to move. What makes it matter is who was born there. On 14th October 1879, Stella Maria Sarah Miles Franklin was born at the Lampe homestead, her grandmother's house on Talbingo Station. Her mother rode more than 100 kilometers by horse and sulky from Brindabella to give birth there. Franklin wrote My Brilliant Career in 1901, and Australia's most prestigious literary prize now carries her name. She wrote that no other place ever replaced Talbingo for her. In 1968, the Snowy Mountains scheme closed Jonama Dam, a 44-meter rockfill wall, and the valley filled. The homestead, the station remnants, and the township went under together. Drive into the new Talbingo today, a town of 224 people built for hydro workers, and you pass a sign. It reads, Original Lampe Homestead, birthplace of Miles Franklin in October 1879, 500 meters. Follow the arrow and you are standing at the edge of the water. Number 5. Argyle Downs. Argyle Downs was a cattle station in the East Kimberley, on the Ben River near its junction with the Ord, less than an hour from where Kununurra now stands. The Duracks built it. Between 1883 and 1885, the family drove 7,500 head of cattle from western Queensland to the Ord in one of the longest droving feats in recorded history. and Patsy Durack finished the stone homestead in 1895, the year after his wife Mary died of malaria. At their peak, the Duracks held 5 stations covering an area the size of Belgium. Then the Ord River Dam was completed in early 1971 to create Lake Argyle. Crews dismantled the homestead stone by stone and trucked it to Kununurra for storage. Everything else stayed. The rain that season was far heavier than anyone predicted, and by January 1972, the water was rising towards the flowering magnolia and poinciana canopies in the garden. Outbuildings, sheds, machinery, and water tanks went under where they stood. The homestead was rebuilt 15 kilometers away and opened as a museum in June 1979. The station itself is a dive site in the middle of Lake Argyle, about 17.5 meters down at full capacity. Divers share the water with freshwater crocodiles. Number 4. Old Jindabyne. Old Jindabyne grew up in the 1840s around a crossing on the Snowy River, on the cattle route between the Monaro High Country and Gippsland. Around 250 people lived there. Google shows you Lake Jindabyne, a ski town, boat ramps, and a foreshore park. What it cannot show you is how carefully the government took the old town apart. In 1959, all new construction was banned. In 1960, residents were told the town would be relocated, and between 1962 and 1964, they moved uphill into new houses. A few buildings were dragged to the new site. The rest were demolished, including St. Columkille's Catholic Church, built from sand and pebbles pulled out of the Snowy and mixed with cement. The headstones were relocated, the memorial gates were relocated, and every set of human remains that could be recovered was dug up and moved. On the 19th of December 1964, the town held a farewell pageant and crossed the old bridge together for the last time. In 1967, an army demolition team blew that bridge up with gelignite while people stood and watched. And some of them cried. The dam closed the same year. When the lake drops, the foundations and front steps of St. Columkille's break the surface. Everything else is 40 meters down. Number 3. Burra Garang. The Burra Garang Valley is 60 kilometers southwest of Sydney's center, and it is where the city's drinking water comes from. Farming towns filled it, including the town of Burra Garang itself, along with coal mines that pulled roughly 72 million tons out of the Burra Garang and Natai country. Sydneysiders came up for weekends of horse riding and dances at valley guest houses. Google shows you Lake Burra Garang, 2,031 gigaliters, 52 kilometers long, 105 meters deep in places. What it cannot show you is any of the rest. Through the 1950s, the Water Board bought or resumed every property. About 170 residents were pushed out. Houses were pulled down and the valley was stripped of trees. Warragamba Dam was completed in 1960. For the Gundungurra and Darug people, it was the second dispossession of the same country in a century, and more than 1,000 cultural sites, including cave art and burial places, sit in the flood zone. One Gundungurra woman, Dale Chalker, was a child when her family were forced off their farm. You cannot visit. A 3-kilometer exclusion zone rings the entire lake. In February 2007, the reservoir hit an all-time low of 32.5%, and Water NSW photographed the exposed bed, including an abandoned army tank. 5 million people drink this valley every day, and almost none of them can walk into it. Number 2. Old Tallangatta. Old Tallangatta sat at the top of the Mitta arm of Lake Hume, 39 kilometers east of Wodonga. It had 2 hotels, 4 petrol stations, 4 churches, a row of shops and 2 picture theaters, and more than 900 people lived there. It lived under a death sentence for 30 years. As early as 1926, officials were saying publicly that if Hume Dam were ever enlarged, parts of Tallangatta might have to go. In the 1950s, they enlarged it, the water level rose 9 meters, and the entire town was moved 8 kilometers west to a grazing run called Bolga at a cost of £2.5 million. Weatherboard houses were jacked up onto rollers and hauled out by truck and rail. One man remembers riding his bike around a schoolroom while it was being carried on a truck over the summer holidays. Free buses and a dedicated train ran between the old town and the new one, and in the sodden year of 1956, that train was the community's only link. The move was declared complete on 29 June 1956. In 2007, Hume Dam fell to 1%. Old Tallangatta came back. The bank's foundations and the line of Tawong Street clear in the mud. The buildings themselves had rotted away 50 years earlier. Number 1. Old Adaminaby. Old Adaminaby was a farming and mining town in the Snowy Mountains, west of Kuma, with about 700 residents and a century of history behind it. Copper made it. At the Kylo mine in 1910, there were 110 men and boys working, later 195 with electric lighting so the shafts could run around the clock. That year, a 23-ton boiler was hauled 50 kilometers from Kuma by 76 bullocks over 6 weeks. The ore ran out in April 1913. Then the snowy scheme came. In mid-1957, residents watched water creep up the valley towards them. The stone buildings, the pubs included, were bulldozed. Lake Yukonbean holds 6 times Sydney Harbor, and at full supply, the town lies under more than 70 meters of it. Here is what makes Adaminaby different from every other drowned town in Australia. It comes back. Glimpsed in the early 1980s, again during the Millennium Drought, and in 2018 fully exposed after around 80% of the lake had been drawn off for irrigators and power. In 2007, with the lake down near a tenth of capacity, people arrived with shovels to pick through what was left, and a conservation order had to be imposed to stop them. Former residents walked their own streets again. The sloping main street is now used as a boat ramp. If you like this video, make sure to comment which of these drowned towns you would most want to see come back out of the water and watch this next video.